Nina Taylor walked into the glass-walled conference room at Storm CP, and the air seemed to freeze around her, as if the very atmosphere recoiled. There was no designer bag, no heels clicking confidently on the marble floor, no flashy watch gleaming under the overhead lights. Just a quiet woman in scuffed flats, a ponytail, and a plain folder held tightly to her chest. The HR director, Diane Brooks, arched an eyebrow, her voice sharp enough to leave a mark. She looks like she borrowed that outfit from a lost-and-found box. A slick-haired guy in a pinstriped suit, Greg Palmer, didn't miss a beat. "We're interviewing candidates, not collecting charity cases." A ripple of laughter spread across the room, each chuckle a cold reminder of the power imbalance. The panel didn't even look at her resume. Their eyes scanned her, eyes that judged, that saw only a mistake, a mere slip through the cracks of a perfectly curated operation. But Nina Taylor didn't flinch. She stood still, unwavering, her face steady, the folder clasped in her hands like a shield. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the man who built this empire, this fortress of steel and glass, was her husband. The towering Storm CP Silicon Valley headquarters, 50 floors that touched the sky, was the culmination of a dream he had crafted, and now his vision was being dissected by those who had never seen the sacrifices that came with it. The 40th floor was where decisions were made, where power gathered in the form of long mahogany tables and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the entire valley. The screens hummed with data, the pulse of the company, yet none of it mattered here. Nina stepped into that world, her dark hair flowing freely from her ponytail, her hazel eyes calm but sharp, an unsettling combination of beauty and intelligence wrapped in an outfit that screamed out of place. But underneath that exterior, hidden beneath the layers of thrift store threads and well-worn shoes, was a mind that could break codes with the ease of cracking glass, a mind that didn't bend. She had earned every seat at the table, every sleepless night spent refining systems that had made Storm CP untouchable. Yet here, she was seen as nothing more than an interloper, a stranger in a world of silk ties and diamond watches. The panel was like a jury, 5 figures clad in cold, sharp suits, each one more condescending than the last. Diane Brooks, perched at the head of the table, in a red blazer that screamed authority, her blonde bob immovable. Greg Palmer, the senior exec, lounging beside her, with a Rolex gleaming off his wrist, twirling his pen like it was a weapon. Tyler Hensley, the spoiled dynasty brat, smirking from his corner, his silk tie hanging like a noose. Laura Chen, the data strategist, her sleek glasses reflecting nothing but disdain. And Mark Evans, the operations lead, arms crossed, his buzz cut sharp enough to cut glass. They didn't even glance at her resume. Not really. They didn't need to. Nina handed her resume to Diane. Just a plain white sheet of paper with no frills, just her name and a trail of quiet victories. Diane smirked as she slid the paper across to Greg. He flicked it back at her without so much as a second glance. "There's no need," he scoffed, his voice laced with venom. "No relevant experience, average education, wrong major." He paused, eyes narrowing, his voice dripping with acid. "So tell us, why exactly do you think you're a fit for this company?" Nina straightened, her voice calm, unwavering. "I've spent 8 years building scalable systems. My last startup tripled its revenue with my framework. I'm here because I can solve problems Storm CP hasn't named yet." Tyler cut in, laughter spilling from his lips. "Scalable systems? Like a lemonade stand app? This isn't a pity hire." Diane smirked, her eyes gleaming with superiority. She's delusional, probably thinks a spreadsheet's high-tech. Laura leaned forward, her lips curling into a thin line. What's your degree? Sociology? Nina nodded, unflinching. It's computer science with a focus on AI ethics. I've published work on the subject. Mark barked over her, cutting her off before she could speak further. Published? We don't need homework. We need results. You're drowning here. Nina tried again, but Tyler drowned her out with a laugh. Save the bedtime stories, kid. No one's buying it. Diane grabbed a marker from the table, her fingers moving with purpose, and scrawled the word loser across Nina's resume, the black ink bleeding through as she sneered. That's your title now, Tyler hooted, a savage grin spreading across his face. Sign it. Frame it. Greg clapped, the sound sharp and mocking. She's a masterpiece of failure. The panel erupted into laughter. Phones were out, filming the defaced resume as Nina stood there, the ink staining her fingers. She didn't move, didn't snap. The word loser hung in the air, a symbol of everything they thought she was. But she didn't flinch. Her calm was a fortress. The venom spread, and Diane tapped her pen on the table, eyes narrowing. You're wasting our air. Did you borrow that skirt from a thrift bin? Greg chuckled. She looks like she's dressed for the flea market. Where's the haggling booth? Tyler leaned back, his smirk spreading. Never seen a boardroom, have you? Maybe on a sitcom. The laughter bounced off the walls, sharp and cruel. It was a pack closing in on its prey. But Nina kept her cool. I'm here to talk qualifications, not clothes. Diane rolled her eyes. Qualifications? Honey, you don't have any, Laura smirked. Try retail. You'd fit right in. Mark grinned. Yeah, stick to the bottom rung. This is big leagues, not a charity drive. Laura upped the ante. Without warning, she grabbed a stapler and fired it at Nina's papers. The metal teeth punched through the sheets, leaving a trail of holes as she hissed, "Let's shred the dream, shall we?" The room was full of sharp edges, full of mockery, full of people who thought they knew the game. But Nina? She didn't flinch. Mark laughed, his voice ringing like the cold clink of a broken glass. Swiss cheese resume, he mocked, leaning back in his chair. Diane smirked, her gaze flicking to the discarded papers, the shredded remnants of Nina's dignity scattered across the table. Matches her holes for brains, she sneered. The pages tore, staples flying in all directions, and Nina bent to gather them, her hands steady despite the sting of their words. But before she could retrieve all of them, Laura kicked the papers off the edge of the table. Trash stays down, she hissed, her tone mocking. Nina's silence stood like an impenetrable wall, the calm they couldn't breach. But they wouldn't stop. Greg, ever the instigator, stood with a wicked grin. Let's spice it up, he said. A surprise test. Logic and coding right now. No laptop. Pen and paper only. Prove you're not a fraud. He shoved a thick stack of papers toward Nina. 10 pages of problems twisted like knots, the kind that would break most coders. Nina took them without a second thought, her hands steady, her breath even. All right, she murmured, pen already flying across the page, equations and loops spilling out like she had lived them. The minutes ticked by, 5 of them, then 10. Tyler yawned loudly, his expression bored. Diane scrolled through her phone, disinterested. Laura muttered under her breath, "She's scribbling nonsense." But Nina didn't waver. She slid the papers back across the table when she was done. Greg snatched them up, his eyes scanning the answers. His lips curled into a sneer, and then with slow deliberation, he ripped the papers in half. The sound was sharp, the tearing filling the room like a scream. He tossed the pieces into the trash without a second glance. "Bare minimum," he said dismissively. "You're not even close. Total waste." Tyler, relishing the moment, took it further. He grabbed the water pitcher from the table, a cruel grin plastered on his face. In one swift motion, he dumped the icy flood over Nina's head, soaking her blouse and skirt. "Cool off, dreamer," he jeered. Greg cackled. "She's a wet mess now." Laura snapped a picture, the flash blinding, her lips curling into a wicked smile. Viral gold. Water pooled at Nina's feet, dripping down her face, but she didn't flinch. Her ponytail clung to her neck, her blouse clinging to her skin. Still, she stood there, unwavering, a figure of quiet defiance. Diane's patience snapped. She grabbed her phone, dialing something into the device with sharp, angry movements. "Security, now," she barked, her voice a whip crack in the tense air. "Intruder alert." Tyler laughed, his voice dripping with mockery. "Escort her out. She's a stain on the room." Mark smirked, his words sharp as knives. "Don't trip, sweetheart." Two guards stormed in, their black polos tight against their frames, badges gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. One gripped Nina's arm tightly, while the other snatched her folder from her hands. Mark escalated the situation, grabbing the folder and tearing it to pieces with an almost violent flourish. The scraps fluttered to the floor like confetti, her work, her life's effort, scattered in ruins. "No room for fakes here," he barked, his tone full of venom. Diane cheered from her seat, her eyes alight with satisfaction. "Rip her dreams apart." Tyler tossed a pen at Nina. "Write your sob story somewhere else." The shredded pieces of paper bounced off her shoulder, clattering to the floor, reduced to nothing more than crumpled scraps. Nina knelt slowly, reaching out to gather them, her fingers steady, despite the chaos around her. But before she could, Mark stomped on the pile, grinding the scraps into the carpet beneath him. "Stay down, nobody," he spat, his voice low and threatening. Her calm was a rock they couldn't crack. "Move," one of the guards barked, dragging Nina toward the door. She didn't fight back. She didn't scream. She simply walked, her flats tapping softly on the floor, her face composed, unshaken by the cruel laughter that followed her. Tyler's voice followed her, laced with mockery. "Mailroom's hiring." The door slammed behind her with a finality that echoed in the cold, sterile room. The laughter seeped through the cracks, but Nina's back remained straight, her eyes unwavering. The elevator doors swallowed her whole, humiliated, but her spine stayed still. And then Greg sealed the humiliation with a final flourish. He yanked the nearest trash can from beneath the table and dumped it over Nina's head as the guards pulled her toward the exit. Coffee grounds and crumpled paper rained down on her, the mess sticking to her blouse and hair as he sneered. "Here's where you belong," he said, his voice a mocking sing-song. Laura laughed, the sound cruel and cutting. "Garbage girls complete." Diane clapped her hands together, satisfied. Perfect exit for a fraud. The mess clung to Nina's wet blouse, the grounds sticking to her hair, her skin, the very essence of the degradation they had forced on her. But she didn't break. She wiped the coffee from her cheek, the brown stain dripping down her blouse, but still, she didn't flinch. She just kept walking, her hazel eyes hard like steel. Their cruelty was a storm, and she stood unflinching in its path. It didn't stop there. As Nina passed Diane, she leaned in, her voice a venomous hiss. "You're a joke. Go back to flipping burgers." Greg flicked a paperclip at her, his voice dripping with condescension. "Here's your bonus. Spend it wisely." The paperclip bounced off her shoulder, clattering to the floor. Tyler stood up, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Wait," he said, a twisted grin forming on his face. "Let's give her a send-off." He grabbed a half-full coffee cup from the table, cold and stale, and splashed it across Nina's blouse. The brown stain spread quickly, seeping into the fabric. "There's your Storm CP welcome," Tyler jeered, as Laura clapped her hands in mocking applause. "Perfect. She's brooded now." Nina wiped the coffee from her cheek, the cold liquid dripping down her shirt. But she didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She just kept walking. The guards pulled her harder, their hands gripping her arms with increasing force, but she didn't resist. The lobby hit her like a slap, a cold, indifferent reminder of the world she had just been ejected from. Marble gleamed. Employees bustled around her, oblivious to the woman in stained grey being marched out. One of the guards shoved her shoulder, his grip tightening. "Keep moving." The other tossed her folder into a bin by the exit. "Don't come back," he barked. The glass doors swung open, and Nina stepped into the sunlight. The coffee soaked her shirt. Her resume, her dreams, were trashed. But her eyes remained clear. She dialed her phone, the number she knew by heart. "It's me," she said, her voice calm. "It went bad." His voice tightened on the other end. "How bad?" she told him. No tears, no tremor in her voice. "The coffee, the test, the guards." "I'm coming," he said, his voice a steady promise. Morning broke with a storm of its own. Diane's red blazer hung like a shroud, the symbol of her shame now that her marker had become a noose, a symbol of the woman whose code ran their empire, the woman she defaced. Her hands trembled as she stood before the board, her career reduced to ash in the aftermath of her venomous hisses. The replay of her smug words echoed for millions to hear, her name now a stain on the company's legacy. Greg's Rolex, once a symbol of power, now dangled uselessly from his wrist. The coffee he'd poured over Nina, a chain that bound him to his disgrace. He had soaked the very brain behind their profits. His actions now buried him in the rubble of his own making. His name, blacklisted, erased from the industry like a bad memory. Tyler's pinstriped suit, once a badge of his inherited wealth, now hung limp on his frame. The water he'd doused Nina with, marking him for life. He had drenched the very soul of Storm CP, and with it, his dynasty's doors had slammed shut. His laughter, which had echoed through the room like an echo of privilege, was now a ghost. Investors jeered in the background, the screen as his fate burned was their shame into history. Every sneer, every jab, a nail in their collective coffin. And it was Nina, their quiet executioner, whose rise had been the final reckoning. Elias didn't flinch as he spoke, his voice calm, controlled, a stark contrast to the storm of devastation sweeping through the room. "You tore her test apart," he began, eyes never leaving the group. "Solved perfectly, faster than any of you could dream." He paused, his gaze narrowing. "You threw coffee. You called security." His voice lowered to a dangerous edge. "Say it again, Diane." Diane's lips quivered. I can't," she stammered. Tyler stared down at his shoes, mute. Greg rasped. "Mistake," Laura whispered. "We didn't know." Mark croaked. "Sorry." Elias leaned in, his words colder than ice. "Sorry's nothing. You showed me who you are. Small, cruel, blind." He nodded toward the security guards, the same ones who had escorted Nina out with such disdain. "Storm CP doesn't carry trash." The room held its breath as the guards moved in. Diane's blazer dragged across the floor. Greg's Rolex dangled uselessly. Tyler's tie flopped like a noose. Laura's glasses slipped from the bridge of her nose, their lenses too fogged with shame to see clearly. Mark's buzzcut bowed lower, his swagger evaporating with every step. The fallout was swift, unforgiving, a wildfire of retribution. Diane, Greg, Tyler, Laura, Mark. They were all fired on the spot, their badges ripped from their chests, the symbols of their power rendered meaningless as they were marched out of the boardroom. The board watched, silent but not blind. Shareholders nodded, their faces grim as they typed furious notes. Investors scowled, their gazes piercing through the live feed. Laura's glasses, once a symbol of her supposed intellect, could no longer hide her fall. Her viral shredder pics were now a curse, a testament to her own arrogance. She had shredded Nina's work, but now her resume was nothing more than the trash she had so gleefully discarded. Mark's buzzcut, once sharp and proud, hung low as he slinked away, his hands shaking as he begged at the feet of his fallen empire. Once the man who'd shredded Nina's dignity, now reduced to a beggar, clutching the remnants of his past in a fistful of tattered paper. The boardroom's silence roared with the echo of their ruin. Every laugh, every cut, a boomerang that smashed them back into the dirt they'd tried to bury Nina in. Elias's calm, unyielding wrath had turned their world to ash, and Nina's steady gaze, the quiet strength she'd wielded, had dropped the gavel. Their own words had hung them. Storm CP blacklisted them, their names torched across the industry. No firm would touch them. Resumes shredded, calls blocked, LinkedIn profiles, dead air. Diane's blazer, once a symbol of power, would now find its way to a thrift rack. Greg's Rolex would be pawned for rent money. Tyler's dynasty had turned on him, his family name now a weight he would drag for the rest of his days. Laura's glasses would be sold for scraps. Mark's swagger, once so proud, had crumbled to dust. Their titles, their reputations, their lives, erased in the blink of an eye, all for the sneers at a woman they never took the time to see. 6 months later, rain lashed against a downtown station. Commuters rushed by, umbrellas snapping open against the storm. Greg Palmer, once a senior exec at Storm CP, slumped against the wall, unshaven, coat torn. A cardboard sign shook in his hands, his fingers trembling in the cold. Please help. His Rolex was gone, and his sneer, a faint echo of what once was now replaced with the hollow desperation of a man who had everything and lost it all. Heels clicked sharply on the wet pavement, and Nina walked past him, her hair still in that familiar ponytail. Now clad in a navy coat, her presence was a quiet storm. She had just keynoted at an AI ethics summit, her voice bending the future, while Greg's crumbled behind him. She paused, reached into her pocket, pulled out a quarter, shiny and cold, and dropped it into his trembling palm. It glinted in the dull light. The guy who'd ripped her test apart, now clutching her coin. She met his eyes for a moment. A faint smile flickered on her lips. And then she walked on, her flats tapping softly on the wet pavement, steady and unyielding. Her strength was a silent thunder. That coin wasn't pity. It was justice, cold, sharp, and unrelenting. Nina didn't need to scream. She let their own rot bury them. She had forged Storm CP's heart. They had spat on it. And now Elias had turned their world to ash. Now Nina stood taller while they sank lower. A lesson was carved in their fall. If you've ever been judged by how you look, hit like, drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit.